This was a dangerous game between a husband and wife. It didn't just lead to death, but also created a situation far more terrifying. The main characters are a middle-aged couple, Jessie and her husband Gerald. They have been married for years, but their relationship is in serious trouble. To save their failing marriage, they decide to take a trip to a remote lake house for the weekend. It's a sunny Saturday when they drive there, hoping to spend some quiet time together. As they get closer to their destination, the car radio plays a news report about a grave robber. Lately, someone has been stealing bones from graves in the area near their vacation home. Gerald, who is driving, listens to the news and gets distracted for a moment. He nearly hits a stray dog standing in the middle of the road. The dog looks thin and hungry, chewing on a dead animal. When they arrive at the lake house, Jessie feels sorry for the dog. She cuts up some steak and leaves it outside to feed him. Meanwhile, Gerald is impatient. He's eager to start the game he planned for their trip. He pulls Jessie into the bedroom, so rushed that he forgets to close the front door. In the bedroom, Jessie puts on a new, revealing nightgown to excite her husband. Gerald takes out 2 pairs of handcuffs he brought for their game. He locks Jessie's wrists to the bedposts, securing her in place. Then, he takes a blue pill to enhance his experience, preparing for a long night. But before anything happens, Gerald suddenly clutches his chest. His body stiffens, and he collapses on top of Jessie, completely still. At first, Jessie thinks he's just acting as part of the game. She waits, expecting him to continue, but several minutes pass, and he doesn't move. Realizing something is wrong, Jessie calls his name and tries to push him off with her feet. When she finally manages to roll him off her, his face is twisted, his body rigid. He isn't breathing. In shock, she loses her grip with her legs. Without support, Gerald's body falls off the bed, hitting the floor with a heavy thud. His head slams against the wooden surface, splitting open. Blood spreads quickly beneath him, but he still doesn't move. At that moment, Jessie understands what happened. Gerald must have had a sudden heart attack, likely triggered by the excitement and the pill. He's dead. Panic sets in as Jessie tries to sit up. She struggles against the handcuffs, but they are tightly locked around her wrists. To make their game more intense, Gerald had chosen reinforced handcuffs and a solid wooden bed. There is no way she can break free unless she somehow rips her own arms apart. She tries to think. Maybe she can call for help. She looks at her phone, lying on a nearby table, but her hands can't reach it. Voice commands aren't an option either. Her phone doesn't have that feature. Left with no choice, she screams as loudly as she can, hoping someone will hear her. She shouts until her throat is raw, but no one comes. That's when she remembers. Gerald picked this lake house because of its complete isolation. There are no neighbors nearby. No one is around for miles. Even passing strangers are rare in this area. The sun starts to set, and exhaustion creeps in. Just as she feels herself sinking into despair, she hears a sound in the living room. Her heart races with hope. Maybe someone heard her cries and came to help. But before she can call out again, she sees movement. It's not a person. The stray dog she fed earlier walks into the bedroom. The steak wasn't enough to satisfy its hunger. It sniffs the air and approaches Gerald's lifeless body. Jessie watches in horror as the dog licks the blood on the floor. She kicks and shouts, trying to scare it away, but the dog isn't afraid. It seems to realize she's trapped and helpless. Then, without hesitation, the dog bites into Gerald's arm and rips off a chunk of flesh. Jessie screams, tears running down her face. And then, suddenly, Gerald's body moves. With his hand pressed against the wound, he starts to sit up. Jessie is overjoyed when she sees Gerald moving. She begs him to unlock the handcuffs. But Gerald doesn't seem to hear her. Instead, he complains that she was too afraid to feed the stray dog with steak earlier. As he tries to chase the dog out of the bedroom, he suddenly trips. Jessie looks down and realizes what he tripped over, his own lifeless body. The scene in front of her isn't real. Exhaustion and despair have made her hallucinate. She tries to calm herself, but the vision of Gerald doesn't disappear. He keeps speaking, insulting her, calling her useless. He tells her she always runs away from problems instead of facing them. Jessie feels anger rising inside her. She clenches her teeth and forces her right hand free from the handcuff, ignoring the pain. Then she breaks the wooden bedpost on her left side and removes the other cuff. She thinks she has finally escaped until she blinks and sees herself still lying on the bed, both hands restrained. She isn't free. The entire escape was another hallucination. Now, She sees not only Gerald but another version of herself standing in the room. Unlike Gerald, this other Jessie doesn't criticize her. She encourages her to find a way to survive. Gerald, however, doesn't stop talking. He keeps belittling her, and eventually the two hallucinations start arguing. Their argument forces Jessie to confront something buried deep in her past. She remembers the summer she was 12 years old. She was wearing a pretty dress, sitting on a bench by the lake with her father, watching a solar eclipse. Her father asked her to sit on his lap. Then he did something terrible to her. When it was over, he warned her not to tell anyone. She was too afraid to disobey him. Her mother suspected something had happened, but instead of confronting her husband, she chose to stay silent, unwilling to break the family apart. That day left a deep scar on Jessie. Since then, she became timid and passive. Whenever she faced pain or difficulty, she chose to endure it rather than fight back. Her marriage to Gerald followed the same pattern. To outsiders, they looked like a loving couple. But only Jessie knew the truth. Gerald was arrogant and selfish. He tore down her confidence, controlled her, and had affairs with other women. She kept quiet and tolerated it, maintaining the illusion of a stable marriage. But deep down, their relationship was already broken. Now, Gerald is dead, and she is alone in this desperate situation. And yet, she reacts the same way she always has, by trying to escape through illusions instead of facing reality. But avoidance won't save her. If she doesn't act soon, she will die here. Jessie closes her eyes and forces herself to think clearly. Escaping the handcuffs seems impossible. Her best hope is to wait for rescue. Her family will realize she and Gerald are missing. Someone will come looking for them. But she has already been trapped here for hours. She is exhausted, and thirst is becoming unbearable. If she doesn't find water, she won't last long. She suddenly remembers something. Before Gerald died, he left a glass of water on the shelf above the bed. She stretches her hand and manages to reach the edge of the shelf. Carefully, she tilts it, making the glass slide down into her grip. Holding it is one thing, but drinking from it is another. With her hands locked behind her, she can't bring the glass to her lips. Frustrated, she sets it back down and tries to think of another way. Then, she remembers the price tag from her new nightgown. She had torn it off earlier and left it on the shelf. She carefully reaches for it, rolls it into a makeshift straw, and lowers it into the glass. Finally, she drinks the water. She doesn't finish it all. She knows she has to ration it carefully. Jessie saves half of the water for later, just in case. After drinking a little, she closes her eyes, trying to rest and conserve her strength. At midnight, she is startled awake by the sound of barking. When she opens her eyes, she sees the stray dog, which had been in the bedroom, suddenly running out of the house as if frightened by something. Jessie scans the room, tense. In the darkness, she notices a tall shadow standing in the corner. She instinctively calls out for help, but as the figure moves closer, terror grips her. It is not a person. It is a deformed man, covered in sagging flesh. He doesn't speak. Instead, he opens a wooden box in his hands, revealing jewelry and several human bones inside. Jessie realizes she might be hallucinating again. She squeezes her eyes shut, refusing to look at him. Eventually, she drifts back to sleep. By morning, Jessie is woken by a strange sensation, a warm, wet feeling on her foot. When she opens her eyes, she sees the stray dog. It has returned and is licking her foot. Panicked, she kicks the dog away and forces herself to sit up. Her body protests. Hanging in the same position all night has cut off circulation. Her hands are swollen and numb, and her legs are cramping violently. If she hadn't woken up, her limbs might have been permanently damaged. Realizing this, she immediately tries to move her hands and legs, bringing back circulation. Then, she drinks the rest of the water. Once she regains some strength, she looks at Gerald's body on the floor. It is unrecognizable. The dog has been feeding on it all night. But the dog is not finished. It stands nearby, watching her hungrily, as if considering attacking her next. Then, Jessie notices something even more horrifying. On the bedroom floor, a trail of bloody footprints. Human footprints. This means the man she saw last night, the one with the wooden box, was real. She remembers a news story she had heard on the car radio before they arrived. It was about a grave robber who had been lurking in the area. If that was him, then she is in more danger than she thought. She has to escape. She makes a decision. She will do whatever it takes to free herself. Jessie smashes the water glass and picks up a sharp piece of the broken glass. She fixes it onto the shelf, wedging it in place. Then, she presses her right wrist against it and begins to cut through the skin, peeling away enough flesh to slip out of the cuff. The pain is excruciating, but she forces herself to keep going. Finally, she pulls her right hand free. With her bleeding hand, she grabs Gerald's phone from the table, but the battery is dead and they don't have a charger. She can't call for help. Then she notices something else, the key to the handcuffs. She unlocks her left hand, freeing herself completely. Despite the agony in her right hand, she manages to wrap it up as best as she can. Just as she finishes, exhaustion and blood loss take over. She collapses. Night falls before she regains consciousness. Pain wakes her. The dog is biting her again. She screams, kicking it away. Then she grabs the car keys and stumbles toward the door, desperate to leave. But as soon as she reaches the doorway, she stops. The tall man is there, the same deformed figure holding the wooden box. Trembling, Jessie removes her wedding ring and drops it into the box. The man doesn't move. He doesn't stop her. He simply watches as she walks past him and leaves. Jessie gets into the car and drives away. After about 30 minutes, she reaches a residential area. She is finally safe. Later, the police investigate Gerald's death. They confirm he died of a heart attack. Jessie inherits his large insurance payout and uses the money to start a foundation. Jessie dedicates her life to helping children who, like her, have suffered childhood trauma. After surviving 2 nightmare-filled days in the lake house, she is no longer the fearful person she once was. She can finally face her past and openly talk about what happened to her as a child. But even though she has freed herself from her childhood demons, another fear lingers. Every night she dreams of the tall man with the wooden box standing beside her bed. 6 months later, a news report confirms her worst suspicion. The man she saw was real. He was the grave robber mentioned on the car radio. His terrifying appearance was due to a rare medical condition. The police have now arrested him. His crimes were even more disturbing than she imagined. Not only did he steal jewelry and bones from graves, but he also desecrated fresh corpses, sometimes even consuming parts of them. The only reason he didn't harm Jessie was likely because she was still alive. Determined to confront her fear, Jessie attends the grave robber's trial. Under the bright courtroom lights, she finally sees him clearly. He isn't as tall as she had thought. Maybe she realizes the things we fear the most aren't as terrifying as they seem. This story comes from Gerald's Game, a 2017 film based on the novel by Stephen King. It's a well-crafted and creative psychological thriller. Now let's think, if we were in Jessie's situation, how would we escape? Share your thoughts in the comments.